Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to this virtual series. We're hosting this series in advance of our upcoming Techonomy Climate Conference, which is going to be March 28th in Mountain View, California, heart of Silicon Valley. Our amazing list of speakers includes author and activist Bill McKibben, EDF's Executive Director Amanda Leland, Microsoft CSO Melanie Nakagawa. We've got investors, we've got startups and entrepreneurs. We have really an amazing lineup. We'll drop a link to the event in the chat that you can check out, and we hope you'll join us. And our speaker today, Mary Maxon, wasn't able to join us, unfortunately, at the event in person, but we're so grateful to have her here with us today. Mary, you can turn on your camera as I give you a little introduction.
Sure.
Bio is a mouthful, but I'm going to try to get through it here. So Mary Maxon is the Executive Director of BioFutures at Schmidt Futures, leading the bioeconomy program, an effort focused on maximizing the potential of biotechnology toward a circular bioeconomy. Previously, she was Associate Laboratory Director for Biosciences at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and before that, she was Assistant Director for Biological Research at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, where she was the original author of the Obama administration's National Bioeconomy Blueprint. She currently serves as a U.S. State Department appointed delegate to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's Biotechnology, Nanotechnology, and Converging Technologies Working Party. She's also a member of the Bioeconomy International Advisory Council and a member of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Standing Committee on Biotechnology Capabilities and National Security Needs. You are a busy person, and we're really grateful to have someone with your expertise join us. Maybe can you start telling us a little bit about your work at Schmidt Futures and the BioFutures program you lead?
Yes, thanks, Caitlin. And I really want to say thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of this series today, and I really wish I could join you in person. I was really looking forward to it. The BioFutures program at, first of all, I should say Schmidt Futures is a philanthropic initiative. It's not a foundation, it's different. And it's one of the reasons why I came here to try this new effort. Schmidt Futures is focused on betting early on exceptional people to solve hard problems in science and society. The bioeconomy is a hard problem to solve. We have a very linear economy where you take, make, use, and throw away. And moving a sort of circular bioeconomy in the US, as I've seen other countries do from my seat at international tables, is something that I'm very interested in doing. A program here now focused on trying to enable a future circular bioeconomy that is resilient, equitable, streamlined, and competitive. I know that's a lot, but I'll stop there because I know you have a lot more questions.
Yes, no, so that's a great setting the table. Maybe we could start by defining what the bioeconomy is, and maybe more specifically, what a circular bioeconomy is.
Yeah, great. So 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago now, when we released the National Bioeconomy Blueprint in the Obama administration, the bioeconomy, that term was not, well, it wasn't a household term by any means, it's still not, but it was more or less a boutique term that had arisen out of Europe, actually, with an OECD document, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, focused on the bioeconomy, a policy agenda for 2030. I read that document and I was transfixed by it. What is bioeconomy? In the US, we define it as, well, you know what economy means, it's economic activity and it's measurable. In the US, it's economic activity that is measurable, that comes from bioinnovation. Now, when most people think about biotechnology, they think about biomedical solutions, like mRNA vaccines and things like that. But genetic engineering, engineering biology, these things can be used to make a whole lot more than biomedical solutions. And the bioeconomy in the US includes sectors that are measurable: biomedical, agricultural, industrial, we can talk more about that if you want to, and tools, kits, and services. You know those DNA kits for ancestry and your dog's breed and all that? These are all nucleic acid DNA-based products, and they're all measurable revenues in the US. So that's bioeconomy, economic activity from biological innovation.
And what makes it circular? That's sort of what we're,
Right.
at least Schmidt Futures is kind of pointing us towards.
That's right. So in other countries, the concept of a circular bioeconomy is focused on using waste as valuable inputs into manufacturing. So for me in the United States, I think, so when you think about the US has 1 billion tons of sustainable biomass that can be sustainably created and valorized every year, we could think about how much of that, instead of the corn that goes directly to corn ethanol, what about the agricultural residues? There are all kinds of things that after our agricultural harvests are complete could serve as new renewable carbon, biogenic carbon, non-fossil carbon that can go into manufacturing processes. Forest waste in California, where I live in the Pacific Northwest, what happens to that stuff? It gets burned. When it gets burned, it's more CO2 into the atmosphere. So using that biogenic carbon as input into manufacturing practices, using biological factories to take that carbon, the carbon we have, and turn it into the carbon we want, that is what we're targeting for a circular bioeconomy in the US.
And I mean, so the bioeconomy includes kind of everything you've just mentioned. We're going to try to focus in a little bit more on the climate aspects, even though even that segment is enormous potential. It's really impressive. But one more term, I guess I'd like you to get into is bioproduction. What exactly does that look like? Is it the same as biomanufacturing? And give us a couple examples.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's really important. So what Caitlin's referring to is, here is the strategy that we put out last year. It's available online. If you email me, I'll send you a hard copy. It basically is what I call a play in 3X. The first is a narrative and some recommendations. And the third is a series of case studies. Those are written in lay people language for policymakers to understand. The second section is a very highly technical strategy. And that strategy talks about bioproduction. Now, why does it say that word bioproduction? What is that? Why is it different than biomanufacturing? Today, when you talk to experts, which we did, we had a task force of over 30 people, and we did over 150 interviews in 6 months to try to create this strategy, which was released in April of last year. We learned that when people use the word biomanufacturing, they instantly think of fermentation. And fermentation has been around a really long time. You can think about it as like beer brewing. In that case, they take microbial factories, unicellular organisms that have been hot-wired to put genetic circuits in to make products that people are interested in. That sort of fermentation, that sort of biomanufacturing fermentation is what people think about. When we think about the future products of biotechnology, people who are developing microbial consortia for soil amendments for crops, that's not any kind of fermentation per se. When people are genetically engineering these cool circuits into plants to plant in the field, harvest the plant, and then make the product right out of the plant, that's not fermentation either. And so when they didn't see themselves in the conversations that we were having, we compromised on this term bioproduction to think about all kinds of using biological systems to generate things that would end up in commerce, to be measurable. And we wanted to make sure that all developers of tech could see themselves in our document and understand that we were committed to moving forward, not just with old school fermentation, if you will, but the new kinds of using biology to produce valuable stuff that ends up in commerce. I hope that that makes sense.
Yeah, that's perfect. And we'll get a little bit more into kind of like some of the jazzy applications, the more subtle applications that people may not know about. But first, you mentioned the report, and I was digging into it last night. Again, it's so fertile and amazing. It's really, I recommend people, even if you don't read all 96 pages, like please do take a look. It's impressive. One thing that caught my eye, I want to make sure I get this right. The report says that the bioeconomy in the US is set to, quote, lead history's fourth industrial revolution, one as pivotal as the invention of the steam engine, the age of science and mass production, and the rise of the digital technology. Tell us more what you mean by that.
Yeah, there have been a number of people who've made that claim, and we quoted that in our report. That's not something that we came up with on our own. I think part of it lies in what I just mentioned, that billion tons of sustainable biomass. We are the Saudi Arabia of biomass. If we learn how to convert that sustainable, biogenic, renewable, biological carbon into the products that we need and want, instead of using fossil carbon, that's going to go a very long way to reinventing manufacturing and the industrial type revolution that people claim. I think the Boston Consulting Group put out a report in 2022 that said up to $30 trillion globally, using, according to McKinsey report from 2020, up to 60% of the inputs into our manufacturing processes could be from biological sources. I think that's where that sort of grandiose claim comes from, that there needs to be a focus on the resources that we have to change, to re-envision manufacturing broadly. And I'll say one more thing about that. Because biomass is grown in many, many parts of the country, I mentioned a couple already. California, where I live also, in addition to having a lot of forest slash, has nutshells, almond shells, walnut shells. Where do those things go? Nowhere. They go into landfill. So thinking about how to use this stuff regionally and locally reconfigures the manufacturing landscape in two important ways. It gives us resilience because we're not dependent on localized, huge integrated biorefineries. And it also gives us the opportunity to seasonally use what is available with new high-tech efforts to turn that carbon from waste into new kinds of products. So I think the thinking about changing how we manufacture things from economy of scale to economy of units is something that this bioproduction allows, and that biogenic carbon inputs are perfect for regionally and resiliently around the country.
That's really compelling that the US, how did you say it? The US is the Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. We're
biomass.
never going to outsource that stuff. It's here, it's ours.
And we've, based on the report, the US has been a leader in this, but we may be at risk of sort of falling behind, even though this has been a priority for, the Obama administration. I know you were involved in that reporting and blueprint, but maybe let's sort of take a look at the key benefits and why it's so important. You mentioned resiliency, revitalizing US manufacturing.
Yep. I also, at the start, I alluded to equitable. Right now, we think about the deindustrialization of what has happened, right, in the Rust Belt, and what's happening in places where coal mining used to be the main employer. There's a really terrific example. I can think of one internationally, and there's one domestically in Houston, where a disused chemical plant has been retrofitted for a biological manufacturing purpose and reskilled a whole lot of people who were put out of work because industry left their towns. And so I want to also make the point that this is an opportunity for new types of manufacturing jobs for which people don't need PhDs, they don't need college degrees. What I would love to see, and there's a figure in our, we did a little bit of original research for our strategy. We looked at a series of data inputs. Where is biomass generated all across the country? First and foremost, by county. Here's a picture of it. You can see there's a lot of little counties and the biomass data all across the country. Where are there institutions of learning, whether they're universities or colleges or vocational schools or wherever they are? Where are there biomanufacturing, bioproduction facilities available? Let's also layer that data on with the equitable economic development data that the country puts forward. And we can make predictions about where new facilities might be sited, so that if there's biomass, there's a tech facility, but there's no training facility, that's a good place to put training. If there's a training facility and biomass, but there's no new facility, people need hands-on training. This is a great opportunity for us to move to mobilize whole new talent toward that bioproduction workforce of the future that today we just don't have. And had we had it, we can do a better job of valorizing that billion tons of biomass.
It really does seem win, 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 win.
Yeah.
Now that I say it, it makes me a little suspicious. Maybe we'll get to potential challenges and roadblocks later in the conversation. But focusing back into the climate, so how will the bioeconomy help the United States reach our net zero carbon emissions goal by 2050?
Yeah, great question. This is tricky because a lot of this is new tech, and new tech is always a little more expensive than the old tech, right? So it takes a while to get things so that they can actually move toward cost competitiveness. But let's talk about a couple of things first. Photosynthesis. There's that silly word that the Earth has got lots of photosynthetic organisms, terrestrial and oceanic. Oceans are 71% of the planet. We've got a lot of photosynthesis happening. What is it? Taking carbon dioxide out of the air and fixing it into molecules that do work, right? Creating organisms, creating wood, all of this stuff is a function of fixing carbon out of the air. So biology is already doing part of this work. What if we can turn up the dial metabolically on photosynthesis? What if we can figure out how to modify trees, the genetic information of trees to shoot roots deeper into the ground? What's the difference between an annual plant and a perennial plant? What is the biological basis of that? Well, we go to the store, we don't care. We just know that if we buy the perennial plant, it's going to stick around a lot longer than the annual plant. That's because its roots, the root systems are measurably, demonstrably, extremely largely longer, deeper, and that means more carbon underground. Can we figure out a way to push more carbon underground in living systems? That is a holy grail, I think, of revving up photosynthesis and pushing more carbon underground where it can do more good things. We talked a lot about the circularity thing about climate and getting us toward our goals for net zero. Let me talk about another one thing that other countries are investing in, and we are not yet in a strategic way in the US. And it's going to sound funny. It's called industrial symbiosis. What does that mean? It means citing a company next to an existing company for the strategic purposes of using the waste from the existing company as the input for the second company to use to turn into valuable products. Now, in Europe, there's great examples of this where steel mills give off a lot of carbon as gas that comes out of those flue stacks, and if we could, and they do, trap that carbon and push it into a biological system that will take that gaseous carbon, just like photosynthetic systems do, only a little bit different because it's in a tank, and turn that into a product. That industrial symbiosis gets us a little bit closer. It's taking the carbon that would otherwise be waste gas right into the atmosphere and using that intentionally and strategically to create new products that have value and meet some of our needs. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. We talked also a little bit about crops. Imagine new ways of creating, I alluded to microbial systems that could serve as soil amendments to reduce inputs to crops, such as reduced water for drought tolerant crops, reduced needs for fertilizer, both phosphorus and nitrogen. That would have huge environmental and climate benefits in the sense that we can sort of closely dial what each plant needs with a microbial buddy, a little symbiosis, to make sure that we're not adding more fertilizer than we need, and it's washing downstream, it's going into creating these oxygen minimum eutrophic zones in our water supply. So I think there's a lot, I could go on and on about this, as you might guess. I've been thinking about this for 15 years. So those I think are some big picture aspirational things that have a foothold in tech that's being developed today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where to go next? I mean, maybe, okay, so that's sort of tackling, maybe we could get sort of into a little bit of the nitty gritty of these kinds of products. So
this is fun.
The list in the report is so long. Plastics, mushroom leather, or just, I'll let you start. Maybe let's start with plastics, because that's something I'm particularly interested in and something we'll be talking about at the conference.
Yeah, so I first want to confess that I am not an expert on plastics, but I will say that I know that, for example, Japan has developed a marine biodegradable plastic. That is a really cool thing, because what it means is when those things end up in water supplies at pH and salinity concentrations of oceans, that we don't have, it's less of a contribution to ocean pollution with plastic. So that marine biodegradable plastic, that's great. I would also say there's a bunch of different kinds of plastic. There's compostable plastic and recyclable plastic. I want to say one thing, and again, I'm not an expert on plastics, but what I have learned is our synthetic chemists spend a lot of time in taking those fossil carbon inputs and creating these plastics and nylons and these molecules that are really important to all of the industry that we have. They're really good at pushing carbon-carbon bonds together, not really good at dissolving carbon-carbon bonds on demand. And so I think there's new work in quote green chemistry where people are trying to understand, can we undo those carbon-carbon bonds in plastic on demand in controllable ways so that we can not only break the plastic apart, but maybe even reuse the polymers in certain ways. So that's plastics. There's compostable, marine degradable, recyclable, and lots of different work is going on in that space. So that's one reason why we didn't focus on it too much, because the federal government's working on it, companies are working on it. I think there's going to be an amazing change in plastics. I will say, again, for packaging, right? You just mentioned the mushroom leather, but that mushroom leather comes from early experiments where mushroom hyphae, those things that they're called mycelia by biologists like me, but they're the things that allow mushrooms to make connections underground. You can actually grow those things in shapes to make specific packaging for laptop screens, for monitors, for whatever you want. And you can treat them so that they are durable for a certain period of time for shipping, really strong. And then they can biodegrade, like those little things that now come in your Amazon packages and things like that, that get dissolved in water. Mushrooms have been a tremendous asset in this new kind of moving us toward fewer plastics. And I will say, back to the plastic thing with mushrooms, whole new kinds of food wrapping, not plastic, is being made inspired by that mushroom packaging that I just talked about, out of one of nature's most abundant molecules, and that is the things that crustacean shells are made of. It's called chitin. It's a biological polymer, and people are now making all kinds of new packaging materials that can go on food waste that won't add to packaging pollution. It's strong, right? It's depending on how thick it is and how it's put together, how those little molecules are put together, it can be degradable. And so I think we're going to see a lot more replacements for plastics. So plastics themselves, we just talked about those, but also plastic what do we call them? Replacements that can disrupt the plastic market.
I mean, so important, so needed. How close do you think we are to that being kind of in our day-to-day lives?
It's closer than we think. And I see every day, I subscribe to a number of newsletters, and I see every day new companies that got venture capital funding. They're looking for places to scale up. The hardest thing, I hope we're going to talk about risks and obstacles, is getting the money to make enough of your product. So getting the money to do the scale up. Where do you do your scale up? If you can make a little bit of this cool chitin packaging, but the US regulatory system needs to see a whole kilogram of this stuff made to put it through all the tests that are required before the product can go safely on the market. That is a challenge. So I think more and more, to address your question directly, every day new products are coming on the market. And I think that the challenge is we don't see a lot of this because a lot of it is business to business, companies buying that packaging, and you go into the store and you buy the strawberries that have this new packaging on them, and you don't know that they're not plastic, and so you just throw it in the trash. So I think we're going to see more and more marketing. I think we'll see more and more labeling that says, this is what you can do with this waste product from the brand new monitor that you just received. And so some of the you mentioned about plastics, and I think you questioned about how close are we. Today, you can buy a whole slew of cosmetics that you don't even know have a molecule named squalene. Now, squalene is a moisturizer, a lubricant molecule, traditionally harvested from the livers of sharks. There's a couple of companies now, I think, who figured out how to take the genes that in a shark would otherwise be used to make that molecule, recode those genes so they can work in a molecular factory, and make that molecular factory make squalene. Well, the Revlon and Estee Lauder and all of these companies, as long as that molecule is cost competitive, and maybe even gets them to their environmental sustainability goals, they can buy that product, put it into buy that molecule, put it into their finished product. You don't even know it's there. The other interesting thing about squalene that's biomanufactured now is that it's also used as an ingredient in formulations in vaccines. And so what that means is you can use a biological system to make a single product that is molecularly identical to the one that was already used in all of these manufacturing systems before. You can make it cheaply. You can decrease the loss of life in apex predators that are sharks. And you can put it into multiple product lines that go through separate regulatory practices of the United States. In the case of things that people eat, right, it goes through one set. In the case of things that are used in vaccines, it goes through a different regulatory pathway. And so I think the magic of biological manufacturing is best described in an example like that, which is a case study in here, actually, because I just mentioned squalene that can go into different products in biomedical and cosmetic sectors, but that same pathway can be tweaked and was tweaked to originally be used to make an anti-malarial compound, a drug, and tweaked again to make a biofuel. Now, biofuels are not cost competitive when made by biomanufacturing, so they pivoted again, and that's when they went into squalene. And so companies are making decisions every day and making products every day, and they're going into manufacturing lines. And I would say that we largely as consumers are unaware of this. And unless we start seeing some more labeling and more consumer demand, we probably won't see any, well, we'll have to look harder for it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, education and awareness is certainly one of the biggest challenges. I think people are starting to catch on. You know, people are excited about, you know, fungi and the microbiome. Like it's getting in there, but much more we need.
Yeah.
I guess let's talk about other challenges. We also have one question from the audience that I'm going to get to in just a second, but infrastructure, that seems to be a key sticking point. What do we need? What is that going to look like to get to where Schmidt Futures would like us to be?
Yeah, so today, if I'm a developer and I've got this cool new tech, let's say I have a genetic system, and this is a real example, where you don't have to go kill the vanilla plant or the plant and harvest the vanilla beans anymore. You can make the vanilla molecule using I could do this in my laboratory at a scale like this. I have a bioreactor that's maybe it's a liter, maybe it's 5 liters, and I can make it in a way that allows me to have faith that if I could have access to scale up infrastructure, that maybe I can make my product at a scale that then I can go through the regulatory process and get approved in the US to sell it. So today, venture capital companies don't want to fund me to put steel in the ground to go do a 5,000 liter fermentation run, because I only have to do it once, right? Because then I'm going to go to 1,000,000 liters or bigger and bigger at commercial scale. And so what we're missing in the United States is this modular, different scales, like 500 liters, 1,000 liters, 5,000 liters, that is open and available for developers to use for their 1 or 2 or 3 time application as they go through that stepwise calculation of, oh, guess what? I thought I could make this at scale, but when I got to 10,000 liters, nope, it's costing me too much money and heat to run that bioreactor. I'm not going to be able to sell it at a cost competitive price. We want to fail fast. And what we don't have is that infrastructure, that pre-pilot scale, pilot scale. Well, who does? Well, Europe does. Europe decided to invest when they put their bioeconomy strategy out the same year we did. They started making targeted investments. Today, you can look at biopilots, or pilots for you, it's called. You can look at that website and you can say, okay, I want to look for 5,000 liters in Germany, and I want special separations technology, like blah, blah, blah. So you can go do that search on that website and see all the red dots for where all of the infrastructure is in Europe. Now, if you're a developer in the United States and you're in line at the very few that we have in the US, and you know that you're not going to get in for the next 6 months, and you suddenly see that there's something open in Belgium, you're going to call Belgium and you're going to say, hey, can you do my fermentation runs for me at 500 liters, 1,000 liters, and 5,000 liters? How much is it going to cost me? And then you do this calculation to see how much it's going to cost to ship it back. And so today we are losing startup companies. We're losing their tech because they are going overseas to do not only their scale up work, because once they actually see that it can get done, there is a workforce there. There are biorefineries there that are ready and waiting to take American tech, because it's know-how that then they can use every time a manufacturer gets a new technology in, the workforce gets to figure out how to work with it. That makes them even more valuable. We need that in the US. That is hard to come by in the US. The information, not public. We're working on that. We actually made a grant to fix that. But it's also kept by consultants who want to make a living out of advising people about where to take. So I can understand that there's an incumbent market for consultants who keep that information because it's not public. But the US has to start investing seriously. And the reason I say that right now, with all of the attention moving, COVID taught us how vulnerable our supply chains are. We're not using the carbon we have. It's gonna take investment, both public and private investment. And we just saw China for the very first time in May modify one of its 5-year plans. The 14th 5-year plan was modified. The intelligence community tells me they've never modified a 5-year plan. They've modified it to focus on the bioeconomy. And when they are going to invest in a lot more of this infrastructure, it's going to be harder and harder for us to keep our tech here and our manufacturing here if it's easier for people to go elsewhere. That's a long answer, I'm sorry, but it is something I'm really passionate about.
Oh, yeah, that's very helpful. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what's going on legislatively in the US. It sounds like there's some progress. There's been a little bit sprinkled into the big recent bills, but what are we doing to stay competitive? And then if this fits into, no, let's stick with that, and then we'll circle back to the other question.
Okay, so you said legislative, and that means Congress. I would say we would be remiss if we didn't also ask, what is the administration doing, the other part of the government. But let's focus on legislative. So in 2012, when I posted the National Bioeconomy Blueprint, it was a time when the Obama administration and Congress were not exactly on warm and fuzzy terms. So in 2013, when I saw the first draft of the National Bioeconomy Research and Development Act, I couldn't believe it. I realized, oh my gosh, this is a red, blue, purple. This is workforce. This is jobs. This is innovation. This is exciting to people. And it took another 9 years to get it. That bill got introduced with different names at different times by different parts of Congress, and was finally folded in as the National Bioeconomy Research and Development Act into the CHIPS and Science Act. This is really important because what it says is engineering biology, the bioeconomy regulatory concerns, bioeconomy ethics, all of this stuff is important to our country. And the legislative branch told the executive branch, you will create a coordination office to coordinate this because it's that important. The agencies can't be left on their own devices to put forward these things need to be strategic. By the way, that was the #1 objective in the Bioeconomy Blueprint in 2012. So that's really great, CHIPS and science. I would be remiss if I didn't say that CHIPS Act was the first time Congress made an important and monumental step for industrial policy in the US. $53 billion for fabs, that's infrastructure, and research. in the United States to keep those manufacturing assets here. I want to see the same thing happen for the if semiconductors are 1.2% of the US GDP, my numbers are old now, maybe 2020 numbers, and bio is 5.1. Let's take a look at what this opportunity is. Investing here, Congress, you can do it. You did a good job at appropriating or authorizing. Let's appropriate now. In the case of the FY23 NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, there was also $300 million tagged for biomanufacturing institutes. This is infrastructure. So again, I say a big victory here on the legislative side. This is a big year. I waited 10 years and it's delivering. I'm pretty excited about where we are right now.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, the Biden administration is, I don't know, picking up exactly what the Obama administration did, but it sounds like that is also a priority on their list.
Yes, I would say they picked up, and so let's give some credit to the Trump administration. The Trump administration in 2019 recognized that the bioeconomy is an opportunity. So this is, like I said, this transcends administrations, it transcends parties. This is an opportunity for us in a really big way. So the Trump administration held a summit at the White House and said, hey, all you people from the for-profit sector, the academic sector, come and talk to us policymakers and tell us what you think. They also put out a request for information. An executive order got drafted. We know this because a news outlet published it and said, the Trump administration had an executive order that didn't quite get over the finish line. And this is a great opportunity for the Biden administration to pick it up. Well, the Biden administration not only picked it up, I would say they picked it up with fresh eyes and did oh so very much more. Now, I would be a liar if I said I wasn't so excited to see all of the things that I put in the National Bioeconomy Blueprint 10 years before are still in there. But now they're in there in a coordinated way. And they're in there in a way that I believe is going to move forward now with the urgency and priority that they deserve. I would also like to say that there's a bunch of recommendations in this report that also are remnants. I don't want to say that we're taking credit for anything here. I think it means that this is very timely, that executive order captures the sense of the nation's urgency and focal points. What's missing from our report that's in that, two things actually. This is very US competitive focus. That's in part because of our donors, Eric and Wendy, and their commitment to technology in US to drive our economy and keep us competitive. And I think the other piece that is missing is a focus on biosecurity and biosafety. We talk about its importance, but we don't focus on recommendations for that, knowing that there are other people that are working on those things. What's also missing is an international collaboration piece that the executive order has. So I would say that the Biden administration's executive order 14081, for all of you policy wonks out there, is a sight for sore eyes. It's extremely ambitious. It gave 90 days, it came out in September 12th, I think. It gave 90-day mandates to a couple of agencies, including the Office of Management and Budget, really important. And it gave 160 days, that's 6 months, to many, many other agencies to deliver their products. Those products, those reports are due on March 11th. That's just a few days away. And so once the White House gets those reports from all of those agencies, the White House has about 100 days, I think the middle of June maybe, to develop an implementation plan. How will they weave all of those agency submissions into an action plan for the United States? Now, there are more downstream, after 2 years, after 3 years, remember administrations are 4 years unless they get reelected, and executive orders. I don't know, I didn't know this when I went to work in the White House. An executive order is different from a presidential memorandum in that when a president leaves office, this no longer applies. An executive order has to be revoked by another president before it is no longer applies. So they have to be undone. And so I look forward to the days, hopefully, when this will be able to run its course as a US priority with sustained insane investment and sustained priority urgency for the United States, so that we can we invented biotechnology in California in the 1970s. And we are at the risk of watching the manufacturing, just like semiconductors, just like 5G technology, go elsewhere. And so I know that it sounds like, this is the time when things are all coming together. I really do believe the public and private sector can work together now. Love to see the private sector, if it can. I just mentioned a whole bunch of different parts, right? Biomedical, agricultural. What do they all have in common? They all need a future workforce. What do they all have in common? They all want to see regulatory streamlining. They want to see swift decision-making, safe products on the market. They want to be able to be told, what is the lead agency? Let's talk about mosquitoes for a second. Genetically engineered mosquitoes that are essentially, that tech is developed to kill mosquito populations that carry diseases that make people sick and kill them. Well, what kind of agency should be doing the regulatory risk assessment for that? We know from the genetically modified salmon and the animals that are coming after that, that the FDA views any genetic modification of an animal that changes the metabolism of that animal as being something that needs to be regulated by the FDA. But that mosquito killing technology is actually a pesticide. So FDA doesn't do pesticides, but it does genetically modified animals. So we need to be able to give tech developers answers quickly about who is your lead agency to talk to. We know the genetically modified salmon took a really long time. And I know the regulators don't like to hear this, almost up to, including 20 years, depending on the resource that you look at, before it was approved for human consumption. Now, whether you believe or don't believe in genetic modifications for human consumption, I believe it. The answers ought to come faster than 20 years. I think kill it fast. Don't keep it hanging. Companies cannot. This is just not consistent with our innovation goals. In the case of the mosquito, falling between multiple regulatory agencies, give us a quick decision about who to talk to. Do regulatory assessments in parallel instead of sequentially. This takes longer. And so I think these companies, even though they're working in different sectors, I think if they could find a unified set of messaging and go to Capitol Hill and say, these are the things we need, we could see the kind of appropriations, the kind of prioritization that we were amazed to see for semiconductors. So again, another long answer. Sorry, I don't know if I can't see the chat. So
Yes, no, it's really helpful. The question I wanted to get back to, and you've touched on it a couple of times, but let's dig in a little bit more, is this question of the workforce, jobs, what kind of training is going to be needed, and sort of like end to end, from someone who's more at the factory and someone who's doing more R&D. What's really needed there?
Yeah, if you think about manufacturing, biological manufacturing in the US, I'm simplifying for all of you experts out there who are going to say, oh, you really oversimplified the regulatory thing. Guilty. When we look at how biomanufacturing is used in the United States today, we have what's called GMP, good manufacturing practice. That's a certification for a kind of biomanufacturing that is required for products that are going to go into people. So like the vaccines and stuff like that, the biologics, the antibody therapies, stuff like that have to go through that. Then there's food grade manufacturing. Think about beer brewing, right? It's got to be clean, can't be contaminated. It's going to go into people. It's ingesting. But then there's everything else. That industrial biomanufacturing where we're using bacteria and filamentous fungi. The citric acid that goes into every can of soft drink is made from a filamentous fungus. That, maybe it's a spore forming organism and spores are flying all over. You don't put anything like that near a GMP facility. So we have that different stratified layers of certifications for, what's safe. But with that also comes workforce changes. And what we don't see, we see a lot of people, okay, first of all, backing up. We don't spend enough money training process engineers. It's not sexy. It's not, a super cool, fun job for people to go. It is, but people don't know about it. So they don't, and there's not a lot of really high impact research that gets done. So if you're in a biomedical research lab, you know that you can go to a biotech company. But if you're in a lab where you're working on making a biofuel in a yeast, you don't necessarily ever see the process engineering part because you're just building the biological system. So awareness is a big problem. In Europe, people have spent a lot of money investing in certification for process engineers. And there's kind of a joke, I think we wrote it into our document. There's kind of a joke that companies say, if you don't have a Dutch engineer, you're not going to succeed. So we need engineering, process engineering, chemical engineering for biological systems. That's one thing we need. We also need lots more biological manufacturing. We need to be focusing on making chemicals that we make today with petroleum-based feedstocks, with bio-based feedstock. Bio-nylon and fossil-based nylon is exactly molecularly identical. And so if we could put new manufacturing facilities where that biogenic carbon, that biomass is created, we have new manufacturing jobs that don't require people to have PhDs or even college degrees. You can get trained up with a certification and be, running these big fermenters and isolating the product out of it, running big centrifuges and that kind of thing. It's like the manufacturing for other technologies, but what's different about bio is that bio can get contaminated. Bio can get, it's working with life forms that are self-replicating. Genetic drift happens. The biological system that you made, once it gets in that big tank and the thermodynamic pressures are different and the gas exchange is different and the waste products are accumulating heterogeneously in that big tank, they evolve. And so we need a new kind of workforce. And I think that it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be a genetic engineer. It just means that people who are from different manufacturing positions need to be trained up a little bit to understand how biological manufacturing is different. And so I think it's a terrific opportunity for rural areas and the other thing I wanted to see industry come forward with is a role for developing the curricula in institutions of higher learning, so that when those people get their certifications or their degrees and they walk onto a manufacturing floor, their skill sets match what the industry needs right now. And universities and colleges can't get that. We need to find a way to bring these entities together so that we can actually create that manufacturing workforce of the future that I think is going to be really exciting for young people, especially when they think about environmental goals and getting toward net zero and want to be a part of that.
If I was young and starting over, this would be something to pursue. I have another question saying, Mary, can you speak to some funding resources that can help tackle this scalability and manufacturing issue, particularly non-dilutive and patient capital, and how we can change the conversation to encourage more investment in patient capital to fund next-gen products and manufacturing?
That is the million-dollar question. Boy, do I wish I had a good answer for that. I think one of the reasons I came to, this is my third tour of duty in philanthropy. I've worked in state government, I've worked in federal government, I've worked in multiple biotech companies, I worked in one big pharma company. I can't keep a job, obviously. I think this is a really important question to solve. One of the things that we pushed for, and don't laugh because everyone laughs and I've heard it for a year and a half now. When tech developers are looking at energy technology or USDA driven technology, agricultural, those loan guarantees are there for those specific kinds of tech development. Well, guess what? I just described to you a single technology that got tweaked to do two different kinds of biomedical, pharmaceutical, and formulations for vaccines, and commodity chemical for fuels, and a high value chemical for face creams. Holy cow, how is this going to work if it's not energy based? So we pushed really hard to say the Department of Commerce needs to own this economic development responsibility. The loan guarantee, the financial tools that part of our government has should be put into action for this. So that's one answer. It's not a great answer. I admit it up front. I don't have a great answer, but it's a great question and we need to solve it. There's another, so I'm talking about government, obviously. Patient capital, I don't know, maybe some of these loan guarantees, are are non-dilutive and actually look, they do solve problems in energy and agricultural sectors. The other one, I know this is different. The National Science Foundation just started a whole new big directorate called the Technology Innovation Partnerships, TIP. And TIP wants to move forward with public-private partnerships to get these scale up things, these, get things out of the lab and get them in. Now, this is controversial, of course, because the NSF, National Science Foundation, is a basic research enterprise or agency, but it has recognized that it has a role to play with solving some of these scale up challenges. In this document, we recommended that this TIP directorate should focus on bringing 2 bioeconomy based RIEs, regional innovation engines, to the fore every year. This is what I mean about, all of government approach coordinated ways to get public-private monies, de-risk this stuff for industry, because venture capital isn't going to do it. A couple of other things I'm working on. My first my first metabolic engineering job was in 1998 when we had very few sequenced genomes and we were just shooting darts and hot wiring genomes all over the place, not really targeting very well. And it was same problems today, even though we've got high throughput technologies, we've got microfluidics, we've got great genome sequences, we've got machine learning. We don't still know how to scale stuff up. We still have bioreactors that are pretty much fancy beer brewing machines. And so why are they made of steel? It's expensive. How do we make it cheaper for people like you, I assume, who's a developer interested in this, to be able to do this? Do we have to put steel in the ground to do this? Well, we use steam. We use steam to sterilize. Sterilization is a high temperature thing. That's a high energy thing, and it's steel. That steel is expensive. What if we could figure out a way to sterilize differently? What if we could use UV light at a certain, depending on what the organism is, right? What if we could 3D print bioreactors that could be made on demand where biomass is created? What if we could just, what we call clean sheet the bioreactor and think about it completely differently? So we partnered with an organization, a public-private partnership called BioMade, and the E in BioMade stands for ecosystem. It's companies, it's academics. They pay a little bit in different tiered structures for different capabilities. If you're a big company or a small company, you pay $1,000, I don't know what. And the Department of Defense is taking this very seriously. And those, I mentioned $300 million for infrastructure. I am hoping that this solves some of the problem. Now, the government's going to say, we can't run these things forever for people, for industry. This is a job of industry. But I keep thinking, we just did some massive industrial policy for semiconductors. Can we get really exciting tech problems onto the floor of Congress and say, look, you're going to lose my tech. I'm going to go to China. I think we can figure out a way to mobilize the government, because we know that there is a capability there for non-dilutive investment to help solve the scaling problem once we clearly define what we think we need in the US. I hope that answers it. I told you I didn't have a good answer.
Sounded good to me. But we do have a couple of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them because we're coming up on the end of the hour. Is there anything we missed that you wanted to get into?
Well, to be honest, I got to plant the idea of circularity. I think this is where the hard tech is going to be. It's going to be super challenged. Right now, the other thing I'm working on, we're starting what we call a virtual institute for feedstocks of the future. No company wants to change the feedstock it's using right now for a process, a biomanufacturing, bioproduction process that's working. But what if we could convince some cool tech developing company, synthetic biology company, to co-develop with us a microbial factory that will eat a new circular feedstock from walnut shells or whatever it is? That's where I think this really hard nut to crack, pardon the pun, is going to be in bringing together two types of tech, right? The molecular a microbial factory being developed at the same time that we're developing brand new feedstocks that would otherwise be burned as waste. So that's the one other thing I want to make a point. If you have ideas of companies that might be interested in learning more about this or possibly partnering with us on this, please let me know. My email address is on this document, and the document's on the web. I get 20 pitches a day. I'm sure one more is not going to make a difference, and maybe we can work there.
Yeah, and if our friends could drop the link to the document in the chat one more time before we wrap up. And I guess my last question, sort of give us a taste of what you think we can expect to see in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, and then maybe where you would like to see us in, 20 years, let's say 30 years at 2050.
I think the bioeconomy is, thanks to an awareness of net zero and the sustainable aviation fuel challenge that the Department of Energy has finally pushed out, consistent with the Biden administration's goals. I think we're going to see a big change in air. I think we're going to see more, and we already have seen a couple biofuels that are sustainable, but I think sustainable aviation fuel is going to change everything. And it's a good thing, because as we are electrifying the transportation fleet, where's all that corn ethanol going to go, right? So I think we're going to see a big change there. We're already seeing a big change in food, alternative protein for human consumption. We can brew food now, protein sources. We didn't get a chance to talk about the full range of products that are so exciting, but bio-advantaged materials. France, I hope we can get here in 5 years. France just years ago, they said in 2022, we are going to make all public building construction projects 50% bio-based construction materials. That's hard. That's leadership. Can we get there somehow? These think of the biocement that is now, they're test driving biocement that by the Department of Defense to make helipads, right, on demand, so that dust has, in deserts, in jungles. I mean, these kinds of things are changing how many industries are going to move forward. But I think first and foremost, fuel and food. We're going to see that. We're already seeing the FDA just approved last month the first what we call cellular agriculture, cellular meat. It is actual meat cells, meat tissue from a chicken. And people say it tastes like chicken. It is chicken.
We could talk about this for hours and hours. Obviously, that's what you do every day. We will be continuing the conversations. Mountain View, March 28th. We're also having an event that maybe you can make it in UN Climate Week, New York. I'll email you after. But
okay.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your time. And everyone, we will be sharing a recording of this. You'll get that in your inbox, as well as a link to register to Techonomy Climate, March 28th. Mary won't be there, but we will be having conversations about biocement and, incubating these bioproduction startups. So more to come. And thank you so much again, Mary. And
thank you for the invitation. This is great. I only wish I could see the people who are asking the questions. It'd be so fun to talk to them.
Yes, I know. Well, next time we'll do something a little bit more interactive and hopefully see you in New York. But
thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess that's all for today. Thank you again. Hope to see you in Mountain View.